She laughed and said, "I'm old enough to be your mother." I smiled and replied, "Good thing I'm into moms." It started on a Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun filters softly through half-closed blinds, painting the kitchen in warm streaks of gold. I had gone over to my friend's house under the pretense of helping him clean up after a small get-together, but mostly I ended up leaning against the counter, trying not to make it obvious that I was noticing her. She moved through the kitchen with an effortless grace, her movements confident but not showy, the kind that comes with years of living fully and knowing herself. The way she reached for a dish on the top shelf made me catch my breath without realizing it. Her hair, a cascade of soft waves, caught the sunlight just so, glinting with hints of chestnut and honey. She glanced down at me, just briefly, and smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips that made my stomach tighten in a way I hadn't expected. There was a quiet rhythm to her presence, a calm steadiness that contrasted with my own restless energy. She laughed at my clumsy attempt to stack a pile of plates, and the sound was warm, soft, a little like sunlight through leaves. Without thinking, I moved a step closer to hand her a heavy dish. Our hands brushed for a fraction of a second, and I could feel the warmth of her skin lingering against mine. Just a touch, nothing more, but enough to make my pulse quicken and my thoughts scatter. I caught myself staring a moment too long when she turned to grab a towel. There was a gentle elegance in the way she tilted her head, the quiet strength in her posture, and the subtle scent of her perfume, something floral, understated, comforting, that seemed to fill the small kitchen. I tried to focus on the task at hand, pretending to care about the precarious stack of plates, but my eyes kept drifting back to her. For a moment, I wondered what it would be like if this wasn't just my friend's mom, if the social rules and the age gap didn't exist. My mind immediately scolded me, inappropriate, impossible, but the curiosity, the spark of something unexpected, refused to be ignored. There was something magnetic about her, a warmth and quiet confidence that made it impossible not to notice every small movement. Even as I tried to act casual, I felt the beginnings of something shifting, a tension, a curiosity, a subtle pull I didn't quite understand yet. That small brush of hands, the fleeting glance, the soft laugh, they were all tiny threads weaving a quiet intrigue between us, a spark that would slowly grow in ways neither of us were ready to name. The playful tension started subtly, almost imperceptibly, like the shift of sunlight as clouds drift across the sky. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, half-heartedly scrolling through my phone, when she walked in carrying a mug of coffee. The warmth of the ceramic steamed faintly in the cool air, curling around her fingers, and I noticed the faint scent of cinnamon in the mug, comforting, homely, yet somehow intoxicating in the quiet intimacy of the living room. She placed the mug on the coffee table and leaned slightly against it, her gaze catching mine just long enough to make me aware of how little space separated us. Her smile was casual but carried a trace of mischief. "I'm old enough to be your mother," she said lightly, a teasing lilt in her voice that made my heart skip in an odd, thrilling way. I looked up at her, trying to keep my expression neutral, though my pulse betrayed me. The words came out before I even thought, "Good thing I'm into moms." There was a pause, the kind that stretches and twists in your chest, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then she laughed, a sound that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. But there was a shift in the laughter, subtle, hesitant, and yet inviting. I could feel it in the small way she leaned just slightly closer when she laughed, the faint brush of her elbow against mine as she shifted her weight. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world outside the room ceased to exist. There was no friend, no social rules, just the quiet charge of something unspoken humming between us. I noticed the way her fingers twitched as she smoothed the edge of the coffee table, a small nervous gesture that made her seem both confident and quietly vulnerable at the same time. When she finally looked away, I felt a tug of disappointment, a fleeting ache that I wasn't sure I understood. My mind raced, scolding me for daring to feel this way, but there was an undeniable pull. Every glance, every tiny brush of skin, every shared smile was electric, leaving me aware of her presence in a way that felt almost too intense for a casual afternoon. Even as she walked toward the kitchen again, I caught myself stealing glances at the curve of her shoulder, the sway of her movement, the casual elegance in how she carried herself. The playful teasing had opened a door, one that I wasn't sure I should walk through, but part of me already wanted to. It was a delicate, thrilling tension, the kind that lingers in your chest long after the words have faded, leaving you acutely aware of every heartbeat, every breath, and every small, dangerous spark between you. The following weekend, circumstances gave us more time alone than either of us expected. My friend had gone out for a quick errand, leaving me behind under the guise of helping around the house. In reality, it was just the two of us, the kind of quiet space where small details suddenly become amplified. We were in the kitchen again, but this time the rhythm between us felt different, more intimate, more tentative. She was explaining how to prepare a dish I had never attempted, and I noticed the small gestures she made, the way her fingers curved around the handle of the knife, the soft pressure she applied to guide me as I chopped. Her hand brushed mine, once, twice, just enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. It was fleeting, yet my chest tightened, awareness sharpening with every second of contact. She leaned in closer to show me something on the counter. Her shoulder pressed lightly against mine, and a subtle fragrance, something floral, comforting, and faintly sweet, reached me. I tried to focus on the task, on the pattern of the knife through vegetables, but I couldn't stop noticing how her hair fell across her face, the delicate curve of her jawline, and the quiet confidence in the tilt of her head. We laughed together over my clumsy mistakes, our laughter filling the kitchen and wrapping around me in a warmth I hadn't anticipated. She smiled at me, a small, knowing curve of her lips, and for a brief moment, it felt like time slowed. I caught myself studying her eyes, noticing how they crinkled at the corners in a way that made her vulnerability seem all the more real. Every movement between us carried a tension I couldn't ignore, a brush of fingers against mine while reaching for the same utensil, the almost imperceptible lean when passing each other, and the occasional shared glance that lingered too long to be casual. These small moments weren't bold, weren't overt, but each one left me with a quiet ache, a growing awareness of the magnetism between us. For the first time, I realized this attraction wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper, something that drew me toward her in ways I hadn't expected. And yet, the awareness of the age gap, of social boundaries, lingered like a shadow, reminding me that this was uncharted territory. Still, even with that hesitation, I couldn't help but feel the pull, a quiet, persistent tension that hinted at something more, something neither of us were ready to name but that was steadily threading itself into the fabric of our afternoons together. After that quiet afternoon, everything felt different. Even ordinary moments carried a subtle weight, a hum of something unspoken that neither of us dared to name. I found myself acutely aware of her presence, the way she moved through a room, the gentle rhythm of her voice, even the faint scent of her perfume that lingered long after she had left. Each small gesture, each glance, became a spark that ignited a storm of thoughts I couldn't quite control. It happened in the simplest of ways. I was passing her the laundry basket when our hands brushed again, a brief, accidental contact, yet it left a shiver up my arm. I caught myself staring at her for just a moment too long as she folded a towel, noting the elegance of her fingers, the quiet steadiness of her posture. My mind scolded me immediately, inappropriate, forbidden, impossible, but the pull was undeniable. There was a magnetism in her presence, a gentle insistence that made it impossible to treat her as just my friend's mom. We began to find ourselves in situations that forced more proximity, helping carry groceries in, kneeling side by side to reach a cabinet, or sharing the couch while watching something mundane on TV. Each time, my awareness of her intensified. The brush of her shoulder against mine, the subtle shift when she leaned in to point something out, the occasional accidental touch of hands, they all sent pulses of warmth through me that I didn't know how to process. Yet alongside that thrill was a constant, nagging tension. Every glance that lingered, every fleeting touch, brought with it a pang of guilt. I worried about what my friend would think, about how the world might judge us. But even in that conflict, there was a strange beauty. I was learning to navigate feelings that were simultaneously exhilarating and forbidden, discovering a depth of attraction that went beyond physicality and ventured into the emotional, the intimate, the quietly profound. She, too, seemed aware of the tension. There were moments when her eyes met mine and held, just long enough to make the air between us feel charged. A faint blush on her cheek, a soft exhale, or the way her fingers lingered on the edge of an object longer than necessary, each tiny detail spoke volumes. By the end of the day, I realized that this pull wasn't fleeting curiosity. It was real. It was complicated. It was thrilling. And it was something that neither of us could simply ignore, even as our minds wrestled with the impossible question, how do you navigate an attraction that feels so right and yet so forbidden at the same time? It happened unexpectedly, in a quiet evening when the house was nearly empty. My friend had gone to bed early, leaving just the two of us in the living room. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards were the only sounds, and in that stillness, our shared silence felt weighty, almost tangible. We were sitting across from each other on the couch, the coffee table between us acting as a small barrier, though it hardly mattered. I noticed the way her fingers rested on her lap, the subtle way her body leaned slightly forward as if waiting for something unsaid. Her eyes, always so composed, flickered with a vulnerability I had only glimpsed in fleeting moments before. I had rehearsed countless ways to speak, tried to gauge the right words without revealing too much, but now the rehearsals melted away. I found myself speaking before I could stop it. I think about you more than I should. More than I'm supposed to. There was a pause, heavy and electric. She didn't look away, didn't shift uncomfortably. Instead, her lips curved into a small, almost wistful smile, and I saw the slightest tremor in her hands. The room felt warmer, smaller, as though her presence had somehow drawn the air in closer. Her voice came softly, like a gentle wind brushing past, I've noticed, and I wasn't sure if I should. But I feel it too. The confession hung between us, a fragile thread weaving us closer than ever before. My chest tightened, a strange combination of relief, exhilaration, and fear washing over me. I shifted slightly, letting my hand brush against hers on the couch arm, the contact light but deliberate. Her fingers twitched against mine, a silent acknowledgement, and I felt a warmth ripple through me that had nothing to do with heat and everything to do with connection. We laughed softly, nervously, at the absurdity of the tension we had both carried for weeks. Yet beneath the laughter, there was something profound, a recognition that we were no longer just a boy and a friend's mother, we were two people standing on the edge of something delicate, something that could not be named easily but that demanded attention. For the first time, the unspoken weight between us lifted slightly. Vulnerability had a taste, both frightening and intoxicating. Every glance, every tentative gesture now carried the gravity of acknowledgement, we both knew, we both felt, and for a brief, luminous moment, it was enough just to be seen. Even as the night deepened and my friend's mom excused herself to her bedroom, the warmth of that moment lingered. I realized that confession, fragile and tentative as it was, had shifted everything. There was no turning back from the emotional pull we both recognized, no pretending that it didn't exist, and a thrilling, terrifying curiosity of what came next settled in my chest. After that evening of quiet confessions, something shifted between us. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, no grand gestures or proclamations, but rather a series of small, intimate moments that felt charged with unspoken understanding. Each encounter carried a new weight, a deeper sense of connection that went beyond words, rooted in touch, presence, and quiet acknowledgement. It began during one lazy afternoon when we found ourselves alone again, this time in the living room with soft music playing from the corner speaker. We were sitting side by side on the couch, working on separate tasks. I had a sketchbook in my lap, she was flipping through a magazine, yet the space between us felt impossibly small. Her shoulder brushed against mine, a light contact that sent a thrill through me, not overwhelming but insistent, a quiet insistence that made me aware of her closeness. At one point, I reached over to pick up a pen she had dropped, and our hands met halfway. It was an accidental touch, yet it lingered fractionally longer than necessary. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the softness of her fingers, and the subtle shift of her body toward mine as if leaning into the connection. The room seemed to shrink, the air itself carrying the delicate tension between us. She leaned back slightly, resting her head gently against my shoulder for just a moment, and I felt the steady rhythm of her breath, the faint heartbeat that echoed the warmth spreading through my chest. It was intimate, safe, and yet charged with a quiet electricity that made my thoughts scatter. Every small gesture, the brush of her hair from her face, the way her fingers lingered on the edge of the couch, the shared glances that required no words, spoke louder than any confession could. We laughed softly at something in the magazine, the sound mingling with the music and the quiet of the room, and our shoulders pressed closer almost instinctively. I caught her gaze for a brief second, and in it was a mixture of comfort, curiosity, and a silent acknowledgement of the bond we had forged. For the first time, the boundaries between us felt negotiable, but in the safest way possible. There was no rush, no pressure, only the shared warmth of proximity, the subtle electricity of lingering touches, and the mutual understanding that our connection was growing stronger with every passing day. As she finally moved to stand, brushing lightly against my arm, I felt a pull I didn't want to resist, a quiet reassurance that we were both aware of this delicate intimacy. It was tender, patient, and entirely ours, a slow, building closeness that promised something deeper without forcing it, a warmth I knew I would carry with me long after she left the room. By the time the final days of that summer rolled around, the tension and uncertainty between us had softened into something quiet, steady, and undeniably real. We had settled into an unspoken rhythm, a pattern of closeness that felt natural rather than forbidden, a careful dance between emotional intimacy and the social boundaries we both knew existed. It was late afternoon, the sun leaning low and golden through the windows. I was sitting at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine, when she walked in carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs of tea. The familiar scent of chamomile drifted toward me, comforting and warm. She set one down in front of me, her fingers brushing mine ever so lightly, just a flicker of contact, yet it sent a rush of warmth through my chest, the same steady thrum I had felt countless times before. We smiled at each other, that easy, knowing smile that had become our language. No words were necessary, the closeness we shared, the small gestures, and the lingering glances carried everything we needed to say. She leaned slightly closer to pour sugar into her tea, and I felt the quiet steadiness of her presence, the gentle warmth radiating from her, grounding me in a way that nothing else could. Later, as we stepped onto the porch to watch the sun dip behind the trees, our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us moved away. Fingers intertwined naturally, a small, deliberate choice that spoke volumes. I felt the subtle pressure of her hand in mine, the familiar rhythm of her heartbeat, and the quiet reassurance of mutual understanding. There was no rush, no urgency, only the shared warmth of 2 people who had navigated uncertainty and come out closer on the other side. We sat in comfortable silence, the world muted around us. Occasionally, our shoulders pressed together, her head resting lightly against mine, and each touch carried the weight of all we had shared, laughter, teasing, moments of vulnerability, and the slow, steady acknowledgement of attraction. I realized then that what we had wasn't reckless or fleeting, it was tender, deliberate, and rooted in trust and respect. As the sky turned shades of rose and amber, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of closure. The age gap, the uncertainty, the forbidden curiosity, all of it had shaped our connection but no longer defined it. We were simply 2 people who had found each other in the quiet, in the small gestures, in the slow rhythm of a summer unfolding. And in that understanding, in that warmth, I finally felt fully at ease, seen, appreciated, and quietly, beautifully, at home. If you felt the tension, the warmth, and the slow burn connection, the full story is waiting for you. Watch the complete video now. Link in the description.